Hello and welcome back to No Books on a Dead Planet. This is a podcast I created because I feel like contemplating the end of the world is completely impossible to me. But for some reason, the idea that there won't be books in the future scares me enough into action in the way that I should be worrying about the climate crisis in general. But for some reason, it's just about books. This is a book club where you do not have to read the book. We're going to read the book for you. But warning, you might be inspired to read the book at the end of the conversation. This is me chatting about books with the people that I am inspired by and I love, and it's a good excuse for me. There's nothing more inspiring to me than a deadline, so knowing that somebody else is buddy reading the book with me and I have a day that I'm recording the podcast means that I actually will finish these climate change books on my TBR that I've been trying to do for a long time. Today, let me situate you in the situation. We are sitting in a lovely, as you can hear, lovely picturesque London park in the spring sunshine with one of my oldest friends, although you're not all that old, but you are old in terms of our friendship. Sara was one of my first friends in London. We've had some hilarious times together, and I've invited her here today to chat to me about the 5th season. People in the park are loving it. I'm really glad that what I'm serving up to you today, people, is some atmosphere, some ambience that you won't get from a professional podcast with a studio. In the background, you can hear a beautiful train. Look at that. There's a feat of modern engineering going past us right now.
You can almost hear the graffiti.
Yeah, you can almost hear the graffiti going on, the real art. But yeah, I'm here with Sara. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here with you today.
It feels funny to be like, and welcome, because we have, in full transparency, we've been talking for about 3.5 hours before this point about whatever we like and having a nice little...
Yeah, to minimise kind of the weirder stuff that might come out if we hadn't.
Yeah, exactly. We've got out all of our weird energy over some drunken noodles. Quite literally, they were called drunk noodles. And that's what we're doing. So the 5th season is a book that I had heard so much about. And when you suggested reading it together, because I know you'd read it before and you wanted to reread it, I was really like, okay, this is the deadline I need. I really genuinely know nothing about it, and I'm not a huge sci-fi reader. So I was excited to talk to you about it, Sara, because I know that you work in games currently.
Yes.
And we met because you worked in books. So you are the person I feel like in my life who you live and breathe the cross-section between like the digital world and like the storytelling world. And I was just like, yes, this is the perfect book. But if people don't know you, which they may not, which is rude of them, that is your fault. That's on you guys. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Okay.
It feels very formal. I'm very bad when I'm being like formal with people I know really well.
So I'm Sara. As Leena said, we've known each other for ages, since our early days of being baby book people. And now we are grown up, fancy people of lots of different spheres. I work at an indie game studio that makes a game for kids called Adopt Me, but I still have my feet like in the book world for various things. And actually that was one of the reasons I first came to read this book, which was like, actually I first read it during lockdown, like the first years of lockdowns. Yes,
that is bold.
Yes,
what a bold lockdown read.
Yeah, I mean, I hear like some people like read less during that period, some people read more. I read more mostly because I needed to delay my doom scrolling until like after midday.
You were like, instead of doom scrolling, I'm going to read some narrative doom.
I was like, I will read.
Do you know what I need? Some cli-fi.
Yeah.
Some real end of the world shit.
Yes. And when you were talking about this podcast, this came up because I didn't think of it as cli-fi before I read it. What I knew about it was that it was something unusual to me, like in the sort of sci-fi fantasy area of publishing. Like it was a sci-fi book that wasn't white centered.
Yes.
and that was kind of all I really knew about it. And that like N.K. Jemisin had won like multiple.
She won the Hugo Award for like first best novel or something.
And I think she won an award, like major awards for. This is part of the Broken Earth trilogy, and she won major awards for like every single book. And I'm just
she broke loads of records for it as well, didn't she? So I think that's interesting as well, and that in my mind you've read way more sci-fi and fantasy than I have, but I think that bar is quite low because I've barely read any.
Yeah, when we talked about that, I was like, oh, have I? I'm working in video games. I'm surrounded by people who really love high fantasy. I'm surrounded by people who've read, like Dune and like loads of Discworld books, and I actually think that it hasn't really been since my childhood that I read a lot of fantasy. When I was a kid, I read, Tolkien. I read Tolkien before the movies came out.
Oh, wow. You were there at the beginning.
I was there at the beginning.
A Victorian fantasy fan.
Yeah. I love that he and C.S. Lewis were friends. Back before I understood that I didn't automatically have an equal position in this world, I was very happy to unquestioningly read fantasy books by authors who I didn't really notice all happened to be men. Realizing that now, and that the sort of and that the sci-fi, fantasy, and many other genres in books are dominated by white male voices. These days, when I read, it takes a lot for me to read a book by a white male author.
Yeah. You're redressing the balance.
They really have to win me over. There's a high bar they have to clear, because I just need to. I need to redress the balance and just spend the rest of my life taking on different perspectives than I took for granted.
And maybe when you're in your 80s, it will start leveling out, and you'll be like, okay, I think I've read about 50-50.
I think, maybe I can read some more Tolkien. Maybe I can read Dune. But I think that I don't think I've read that much deep sci-fi fantasy books, really, especially as an adult. I think that as a reader, I like things to feel easy and accessible.
Yeah.
And I do think that the complexities of the worlds in science fiction and fantasy can sometimes take a while to penetrate. And I want to read a book, and I want it to grab me and cozy me up and wrap me in a blanket. I kind of want to know that it's going to do that somehow before I've started reading it as well. I've noticed as a kid, I would just read everything.
Yeah,
everything
indiscriminately. You weren't like, this is how I want to feel, so I'll pick this up. You're just I'll have it.
Everything I could get my hands on, every single book in the house. I read an autobiography by George Best, and I don't even like football. But
you were it's a book.
It was actually quite good. I enjoyed it enough.
Yeah.
So I was a very indiscriminate, hungry reader, but these days I am much more picky, and I need more from it, right away.
That makes sense. So you didn't go into the 5th season the first time you read it thinking, oh, I want to read something about climate. You were just kind of more we want some fantasy that isn't by white men. I'll have it.
I was very intrigued by Jemisin, just because I think her name kept coming up. And actually, I think she suddenly kind of burst onto this literary scene, about 2015, which is when I had my first child, which is also a pop cultural wilderness for me. There'll be things that have come out, and I'll be oh, they came out 2015 and 2016, which means
the year of the child.
I wasn't paying a huge amount of attention.
That's only fair.
So I was intrigued by her, and the amount of kudos she got, and the way that she was doing this within a genre that isn't known for having a lot of diverse voices in it. So I was just curious.
You were just curious. When I was interested as well, because I came at it from the perspective of people who are this is climate fiction. You need to read it. And I went into it and I was wow, it is about climate fiction. It is a climate book, but I think that it's more centered around the characters and what they're experiencing when it comes to weather, rather than it being something that really has a very evangelical thing to say about climate.
Yeah.
It almost feels like that stuff naturally occurs, because why wouldn't it? And then it made me think, okay, the sci-fi and fantasy that I do know about and have read, why doesn't climate come up more?
Yes.
Because if you're going to write a book set in the future, scientifically that's probably one of the only things that's definitely going to come up.
Yes.
As humans. Why don't other things tackle that?
They're always, I don't know, they just kind of have this assumption almost that either we're going to fix everything with technology, or that it's very cute. In the 80s, they started being very concerned about the environment. Don't step on our planet, and green stuff became more popular. And then in Back to the Future, he's oh, don't worry, we figured out how to turn rubbish into fuel.
And everybody agreed. And not only did we develop the technology, all the politicians green lighted it, and they kind of took the financial hit for us.
Yeah, no, it's what we wanted
now
to do.
That's the kind of fantasy that I can't get behind. I'm that's wild fantasy, sir. So I think it's interesting that it to me it's a climate book, but by omission, because of everybody else omitting it. Do you know what I mean? I'm this should be the circumstance of a lot of books set in the future, whether you class them as sci-fi or fantasy or whatever, but it seems that they're just not as often. So I think that, I don't know, I was surprised in a good way that it made me think more about the genre that it sits in and what I know about it, rather than it being something that's like
message
shove
heavy.
It down your throat, like this is going to be you in 10,000 years or something, so you should be acting on it now. It's definitely not a preachy book. It's something that's quite immersive and definitely like character driven, because you were telling me that the author is a psychologist.
Yes.
Which is really interesting.
I'm like, psychologist or like psychotherapist or psychiatrist,
somebody who has studied the psyches.
The psyches.
She's a psyche lady. So and that makes a lot of sense in retrospect now you've told me that as well, because I feel like so this is going to be really ironic if that grey cloud comes and gets us because I feel like having a podcast about the weather be disrupted by the weather would be very poignant.
Yeah, it was
I kind of want it to happen. Anyway, you can't see it on the podcast, but there is a huge grey cloud coming towards us and quite an ominous,
a sudden chill in the air.
Yeah. Do you think there's an origin near?
Yeah.
Oh, my rust.
Rusting.
One of the things about the book, but we're going to tell you what the book is about, by the way, in a second. Hold your horses. But one of the funny things about the book is that they replace the word fuck with rust, because rust, I am assuming, is one of the worst things that can happen in a climate tenuous, a climate vulnerable world.
Yes.
because everything's always flooding and rusting.
Yes.
So I just find it funny that they're like, what, the rust?
Yes. We're your whole rusting future.
So that's my new censored swear word for all contexts. Next time I see your children, that's what I'm going to use instead of fuck.
Yeah, you're like, Rusty.
And until they read the 5th season, I'll be completely without sin.
I think you've got about 10 years.
It's going to be great.
15 years maybe.
Okay, I can work with that. So if you haven't read the book yet, we're going to chat about it, but we'll only do a little spoiler section at the end. So we will gossip about the spoilers, but generally we're going to tell you stuff that won't ruin it for you if you read it. But basically, the 5th season, which is the first of the trilogy, is set on this kind of supercontinent called the Stillness, which, as you start reading the book, you realise is a very sarcastic name because it's nothing but still. It's a continent where they do have seasons, but they often have this thing called what they call the 5th season, which is when there's a kind of almost completely all-encompassing extinction of humans. So it's something that they're used to in the way that you can get used to any kind of climate catastrophe.
Natural disaster, but sometimes human-triggered natural disaster.
And it happens so often that most civilizations within that, on that continent, are only a couple of 100 years old, would you say? Or like some only last a couple of decades.
Yeah.
And that's quite normal. So a lot of the people who live in these societies don't have a massive awareness of what's come before because things keep getting wiped out.
Yes.
Would you say that's fair?
Yes, they're very distant from like recorded history.
Yes, definitely. And we were talking about how we think it is set in this world because they do vaguely reference our world, but it's very vague
and distant,
and they call us the ancient people, which everyone's going to be ancient at some point. I can accept that as a label. I can happily identify as ancient at some point.
Yeah.
And part of the kind of like cataclysm of the book is that there are these types of humans called origins, or are you saying a different word?
Origins.
Origins.
You know what? Like, I don't
Who
think
knows?
Origins.
This is what happens when one of you reads the physical book and one of you reads the We're going to have a Hermione situation.
Yeah.
Origins. Anyway, there are these people that have like a natural ability to feel the earth and if they're trained, control the earth.
Yes.
Not to the point where they can fix climate change. Lol, that would be great. But there won't be a book then. But they can still earthquakes. And
they can clear things.
And while in some ways it felt a little bit post-racial, it's definitely not. It's just that humankind's relationship to race has really changed.
Yes.
In a radical way.
Yes.
So we were talking about how the origins are on paper the most powerful group of people, but it's not necessarily inherited, so it's not like
they're not like a dynasty.
Yeah,
their power is tied to like their biology. They're born with it. It is genetic, but if two origins have a baby, it's likely that they will have a baby origin.
Yeah,
but not certain.
Yeah, it's kind of like ginger hair.
Yeah.
It can skip a generation. We don't know. It's not quite the same as race, but what is interesting is that there are like racial dynamics within those groups, and also it seems like they are the most powerful people, but they're also the most oppressed because of their power.
Yeah.
And people have recognized that power is something that they can exploit. And this, you were talking about kind of like social warfare. What did you call it?
Psychological warfare.
Psychological
they
warfare.
refer to like, there's an empire, a race that they keep referring to as like the superior race, the Sands. Like either it's Sands. Did they say Sands on the audio?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I was like, is it Sanseds or Sands?
We'll go with Sands.
Sands. They keep calling about the Sands Empire and the Sands, and they obviously they think of the Sands as like the most superior. So people will be like, oh, they look Sands.
Yeah.
Or they don't look Sands, or not enough Sands in them.
Yeah,
you know,
Sands is the ideal racial class.
Yeah, the ideal class, and the kind of, I guess, the racial characteristics they want to protect. I also got the sense that, the racial dynamics, or the dynamics are tied to the orogeny, the power to connect with the earth and control it. Like either like having that power. Naturally, not having it, being resistant to it, or being able to control the people who have it.
Yes.
Like there's like, you know, a race of people called like guardians. From the book, like it did appear that most of the characters were dark skinned. Still looking at the map, they refer to the Arctic. It's quite hard. I'm not great with geography anyways.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is this continent? Is it a version of one of the continents? It must be, but like, you know, I can't tell which one
it feels like something you might find out in the later books.
Yes.
It very much felt to me like it definitely is so clearly part of a trilogy. Like it's not one of those beginnings of a trilogy that could just be a book on its own and then they added some books.
It ends on a
like,
cliffhanger.
It's on a pretty solid cliffhanger. And
we don't know what happens next.
We don't know. So if you're listening to this and you've read the trilogy and you're like shaking your fist at the sky, like, no, we know where that continent is, then good, tell us. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, and it also follows 3 characters ish. Three female characters who are all origins and are all at different stages of their life and having their origin powers exploited in various ways.
Yeah, like we open with a character in a very tragic, like the most tragic scene. And it's not too much. It's not a spoiler because the book
opens it.
The book says it on the back.
If it's on the blurb, it's fair game.
It opens with a character whose infant son has been murdered by her husband, and her older child, a daughter, is missing with the husband, ostensibly. Yeah. So we open with that scene. It seems that she's been hiding.
She's been passing.
Yeah, she's been passing.
In a very Nella Larson kind of way. She's been passing as a normal, inverted commas.
Yeah, she's been having a normal
power
existence for some time, but something has happened. It seems like her child has the orogeny.
Yeah.
And that might be part of the reason that we come to this scene in the book and we start to unravel it.
And it's interesting to read about because it's also kind of about the fact that this character has so much power that it's dangerous to have that much power, so she has to hide it by pretending that she has no power.
Yes.
Because she knows that if people find out that she is powerful, she'll lose her life.
Yes.
Or all of her power. So it's a very like meta power situation that I think maps onto race quite interestingly.
The most powerful, the most oppressed.
And because a lot of societies have been taught to hate origins for no particular reason, it would seem, also maps onto race and this idea that because they're powerful, they should be feared. And there's a lot, and I think that crosses over with racial discrimination because we're often races that we're taught to be prejudiced against. They're painted in a caricatural way as being more physically powerful or being dangerous in some way.
Yes.
And that's why the rest of society should fear them. And I think I'm assuming that's directly like on purpose by the writer.
Yes.
And she opens. Have you got the book with you? She opens on a let's pull it out. I wanna read the first page because she opens with a quite powerful kind of intention before the book starts. Sorry, Sarah, I'm just making you
no, don't worry.
Scramble in your bag for it. I did a really silly thing as well, which shows me as a sci-fi noob, because I listened to this book in audio and then I realised I'm missing the rusting map, and the map would have been really helpful. So if you do read this book, please get the physical copy because
looking at the map.
I need the map and the glossary.
It opens with, would you call this an epigraph?
An epigraph by herself. It's her own words.
Yes. I'm like, I know fancy book words and how to use them correctly. I'm not sure. for all those who have to fight for the respect that everyone else is given without question.
Yeah, so I think it is intentional
Yeah.
in that way, that I'm just like, yeah, it's interesting. And also that it's this, I was thinking about prejudice in and how it intersects with jealousy, because I was thinking about how like we don't talk about climate change that much because we're quite disconnected from nature as a thing.
Yes.
And these origins are people who are so connected to nature all the time, naturally.
They feel the earth.
Yeah, whereas I imagine if I was just like a normie living in this world, I'd feel really disconnected. I'd feel like I was living at the whims of nature and I was disconnected from it, and it was this powerful being that was actually probably evil, and almost this kind of jealousy of being of this group of people who are naturally at one with the world. And because that's so alien to me, I'd resent them in some way,
and they're necessary.
Yes.
Like they're needed. Like without them, they're like the difference in this like world where, I mean, they call them coms. Like coms are like usually like cities, villages, but like a large city could have loads of coms. Basically, because of the precarious nature of the world, they don't survive very long.
Yes.
And an origin doing their thing could be the difference between their society getting to last,
or not,
past a season.
And so I think it's about the fear of power as well as like the characters reclaiming their power. And I think also like it's interesting when it comes to thinking about presently what might make this fantasy book become actually like a predictive future book. Is that relationship to power and like power dynamics and stuff. Did you pick up as well? You've read it twice, so you probably picked up on, that they call nature Father Nature, or they give him like male pronouns.
Oh,
instead of Mother
Earth.
Yes, Father Earth. That's what it was. And it's kind of again like that changes. Like I'm like, okay, so our relationship to Earth at the moment is we call her Mother Earth, because she's like friendly and maternal as looking after us.
Yeah, and Father is more unkind, unpredictable.
Yeah, or like punishing, almost. And I kind of think it's interesting because I feel like the society that we live in kind of already treats it like Father Earth, even though we're like Mother Earth, Mother Nature. But I'm like, but we're really... And also it's like the gender of nature changes depending on how we feel we're being treated.
Yeah.
Which is such a human-centric, like...
Which is interesting as well, because they do also... I think they play with gender. I think you're invited to make assumptions when you come into when you meet characters and when you encounter like a particular dynamic. So, the beginning is, the character who's like lost her child, and a lot of there are three main characters, and each of them you kind of meet them with another person and you see their dynamic to them, and the main character's a woman and the other person is often male. And I think in each of those relationships the dynamics might not be what you expect. So the first character is the mother. The second is
Cyanite. Essun is the mother.
The
Cyanite
oldest.
And then Cyanite is in the middle of her life, I'd say 30s 40s.
I'd say
Maybe
late 20s, early 30s.
Okay.
And then the third one, Demaya, is a teenager.
We meet her when she's 16 or something, I think.
And Essun's husband isn't like an active, but he's mentioned, and she interacts with like the one member of the comm that she's in who actually knows the truth about her. And then the second one, it's Cyanide, and she is on a journey with an older origin who has 10 rings, which means that he's super powerful and experienced.
Hot.
Called Alabaster.
I would love there to be a film, because I really think I would fancy Alabaster. Maybe that's something to do with my fucked up relationship with power, but I'm like...
I know, you're like...
Hot for Alabaster.
Alabaster and the 10 rings.
10 out of 10.
And he's older, more experienced. He's sort of a mentor to her.
Yeah.
As things go on, you kind of see he's actually the softer, more vulnerable. Like
he has
member.
a moment that is very what I would liken to the Dirty Dancing moment, where Patrick Swayze is like, "No, baby, they used me. They used me." And you're like, "Oh wow, you are actually okay, fair enough."
You were a soft, sweet man.
Yeah. We can still be oppressed within a power dynamic in which we, from the outside, look like the most powerful one.
Yes.
Fair play to you, Alabaster or Basti.
Baster. Baster.
You bastard.
Alabaster. And then, the third one is Demaya, and we meet her in a very fraught situation like Essun, where she's been kind of imprisoned by her parents.
I would call the NSPCC.
Yes.
I'd call Childline on this.
And then somebody comes to get her called Sheffer, and
I'd like to call him Bad Hagrid.
yes,
he basically comes in as like, Demaya, you're a wizard, but it's not good news from here.
Yeah,
There's no Hogwarts.
This is her realizing her power.
Yeah.
And
she does go into training.
he takes her to the, I guess, the version of Hogwarts, like Rock Hogwarts.
Yeah, Hogwarts under the reign of Umbridge, but if there was like a PTA of Umbridges as well.
Yeah, the Fulcrum.
Yeah.
So it's a place where they round up people from all over.
Oh my god, Fulcrum, because they get all the crumbs off the table. They're the Fulcrum.
The Fulcrum.
They get all the crumbs.
Yes.
Oh my god, that's so deep.
Yeah,
Sorry.
they take all these, I guess, origins, and it seems like they're all teenagers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no children.
Yeah.
They've emerged. It's almost like it emerges in adolescence, perhaps, or can't be controlled. Although, like they say, the power is present as soon as they're born, and that newborns are capable of stilling earthquakes if they need to. It's just about control.
Yeah.
But she gets picked up by Bad Hagrid or Sheffer, and it seems like she's like aware of, this thing where like a person comes and picks up an origin, and I think there's like some words like child eater, or I don't know, there's some like scary words like attached to him, but she actually she finds as they travel away from her family home together that like he's like kind and like it's quite conflicting, because like he's sort of treating her with more respect and kindness than her family has.
But the bar was on the floor, so when he treats her with kindness, I'm like, yes, you should.
Although like it seems to me, but I even like, I mean, I read it twice, but the second reading I could pay more attention to the dynamics. It seemed to me that it was only recently that her family had started treating her like this.
Yeah, because they found out she was an origin.
They turned on her when her origin became apparent, and as she starts to understand more about her power, she starts to see more from their point of view why they're
scared of her.
Yeah, and that mirrors, the first woman that we meet, who is trying to come to terms with this horrible thing that her husband has done to their family.
Yeah, and trying to like work out what fear would drive somebody to do that.
Yeah, and switch. Because again, when she describes her husband, he sounds...
I mean, she married him.
And
it's not one of those societies where you have to marry people.
It sounds like they had a night, kind of like a sort of rustic.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way.
Yeah, not like, what the rust.
A nice like family life together. She describes like their routines.
Yeah. What I really loved about the book, and because you're telling me that the author studied psychology, Nora, is that her name?
Nora.
Nora. I don't know her,
but
I love the name Nora. I want to call her Nora.
NK?
She studied psychology, which makes a lot of sense, because I feel like even though it's quite a unbelievable book in some ways, because so much kind of sublime, in the traditional sense of sublime as in like dramatic stuff happens, that it's hard to picture it, but then psychologically it feels really real, like the way characters react to trauma, the way characters interact with each other when the stakes are really high, all of that feels really real.
All the body language and like the way people react and the tension, you can feel it, but it's also unpredictable. Like people are unpredictable, and then that's kind of, they're living in an incredibly unpredictable world where the lack of predictability means that people die. Like that cities, that comms are wiped out in a moment. Yeah. And everything you love is lost.
And one of the conversations in the climate movement is that like sometimes from a Western perspective we're like, in the future we might lose towns. Whole towns will be underwater. And then everyone else is like, that's already happening. Yes. That's not a future event for us.
That's a past and present.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's interesting as well. And you were talking as well when we were texting about like you living in Indonesia and you feeling like that's added something to your perspective about reading.
Yeah, because I lived in Jakarta, and actually while I was there I experienced an earthquake.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like when I lived in Jakarta for a couple of years, I was like the most aware of climate change than I have ever been in my life, because you could feel it. There was there was extreme weather that devastated like communities in Indonesia and in neighboring countries. lots of actual natural disasters. But yeah, like I was working at a newspaper and I was sitting I mean, the thing is, like before I'd experienced an earthquake, I was like when I'd hear about them happening like in California or something, I'm like, oh my God, that just sounds like so fun. Like imagine the whole world shaking. That would be
That sounds great.
I know, that's really weird. I think that's a really weird thing. Maybe I can blame it on watching too many disaster films in the 90s.
It's the romanticism of Hollywood. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember being in the office and just suddenly I feel like I almost might have got a message about it before I felt it. Like,
oh really?
Like, are you okay? And I'm like, why am I not
like,
okay?
why?
And then,
are you okay?
And then suddenly, like, there was this weird feeling where the whole building moved, and I'm like, did everyone? And then and then I looked on Twitter, and then like everyone was. This was back when Twitter was a bit different than it is now, and
in the before times.
and it operated.
It was a different season of Twitter before the 5th season. We're in the 5th season of Twitter.
We're in the 5th season of Twitter.
That fucking thing.
But you could see, and Indonesia, and maybe still is, but at the time was one of the biggest users of Twitter. So lots of people were tweeting about what was happening, and I'm like, maybe I shouldn't be looking at this and I should just leave, because I didn't have a smartphone, so I was like, I'm just gonna like stop looking at this and actually leave the building. And we left the building. We had kind of like a fire drill situation, and then I think like after time we went back in, but it had more effects. The impact was felt outside of the city more, but I mean that was the first time I really felt the earth move, and I was like it's very disorientating. You're really reminded of like just
when I've thought about like the whole we avoid talking about climate change a lot, I always think about that game, The Floor is Made of Lava. Did you ever play that as a kid? You have to like jump over sofas and you have to avoid the floor. Like basically you lose the game if you stand on the floor. And it made me feel like that, whereas like when we talk about the earth, we're literally just talking about the floor. Like I'm like the floor can move. That's the thing that can happen. And I feel like we treat the floor or earth like air. We're just like, oh, it's always going to be there.
Yeah, we're kind of like, we're the ones moving around and doing things to it and in control.
And you stay still, earth.
Yes.
We'll stand on you.
Yeah, like it feels like it's like the background to us.
Yes.
In this world of the 5th season, the world is not in the background. People are it's very at the forefront. People are at the mercy of it every moment. They can't forget. Like they can't just they don't. They're like fighting to survive. A lot of people, I guess I mean the top percentage of people get to be quite distant from the concept of survival. Like we're kind of cozied in it. It's actually interesting that like something I find missing with a lot of climate change conversations now that I'm not in Indonesia anymore is that I don't think that the impact of it on the global south is recognized enough. So like I am very you can take this part out if you like.
I love a part. Tell me more.
I get quite upset when people talk about like not having children and tie it to climate change. I think that like not having children is absolutely fine, and I think that it's reproductive rights are super important, that everybody who doesn't want to have a child shouldn't have a child, and that everybody who wants to have a child, I would hope that they can have a child. Like whether through birth or adoption. I find that really important. But I think to tie it to climate change it seems to make sense on the outside, but actually like underlying it is like white supremacy, because the global south is the most impacted by climate change. There tend to be bigger families. When I was pregnant, overdue in fact, with my first child, I decided to go to Avery Stone Circle. I don't know why.
A what circle?
Avery Stone Circle. It's like a smaller version of Stonehenge.
Oh, okay. Cool.
I was like 10 days overdue.
Cool.
My midwife told me not to do that, but I don't know. I just had the need to go.
When you know. You need to be to a stone circle. You just gotta go. It's like going to the toilet. You just need to go to a stone circle.
I had to go to a stone circle, and I was wandering around, and I encountered a sheep farmer.
Okay.
He like asked me like how when baby was doing, I'm like 10 days ago, and he went, oh, like don't worry though, like I've I've like given birth to loads of lambs. Like I've helped like loads of sheep give birth, and so it'll be fine.
I've been elbow deep in a sheep before, love.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
it'll be fine. It's probably easier for you. And I'm like, yeah. And then for some reason he decided to immediately, and we had quite a nice chat, and he managed to reassure me that if I, did end up going into labour, that I would be in safe sheepy hands.
Okay.
But then he just immediately switched to like how he felt that like brown people needed to stop having so many children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Like that they were the problem, that they were overpopulate, that that global, that the real problem was overpopulation, and they were the ones doing it. And I'm like,
Farmer's man.
I was like, can you not tell that I'm like...
From a farmer, that is very... I mean, I'm sure that he was an 100% plant-based farmer who doesn't...
Yeah, and I was like,
cows.
yes, my mum does have 8 siblings, but like...
That's not the point, sir. But what's the climate footprint of those 8 siblings? Probably a lot less.
Yes,
That's the thing. I agree, and I think also that there is this slight resignation to being like, oh, the world's going to end, so I'm not going to have children.
It's unkind of me to have children. There is no hope.
Whereas I'm like, if you want to have children, and even if you don't want to have children, I'd like there to be another generation.
Yeah.
Why don't you make sure that it would be nice for them? Do you know what I mean?
Instead of this
it sounds like a kind of
hopelessness.
like, oh, well, I can't really fix that, so I'm just going to... I think everyone should opt out rather than it being like a personal, I'd like to opt out because I'm going to contribute in these other ways. It's like, I'm just not going to like just count. It feels like a way to not have the conversation.
Yes.
And it feels like an appropriate conversation in 2070, but it doesn't really feel like a appropriate response in 2023.
Yes, yeah, like
it's a bit early to be that.
And you don't need like a really grand important reason for not wanting children.
No.
Whatever reason you have is fine.
Yeah.
I like to have a grand reason for why I do not drive yet, which is that I think it is my gift to the universe to not drive, because I think that I would be a danger. But I'm like, so maybe like
we're just trying to stay out of trouble out here.
Maybe I've just channeled it.
Women who can't concentrate and have a deep fear of any big conglomerate bit of metal that likes to move through the earth really fast. Like, I think that's a rational fear.
Yeah.
And I can't handle the heat, so I'm getting out of the kitchen.
Yeah, maybe that's where I'm channeling my need to have big reasons for the things that I'm not doing. But yeah, I mean, also like,
I'm not cutting any of that out. I don't know if you wanted me to cut that bit out. I think that's all going in.
Yeah, that's fine. I think like it's because that often comes up when they're talking about things you can do. They're like, the best thing you can do is not have children. I'm like, we need a future, and even if you're not going to have them, like, we should. I'm
supporting the. Thanks for having 2 on my behalf. I thank you. You've done my work.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think that the idea of like inheritance is a reason why people have kids. Because it's this idea of like wanting somebody to inherit things, and I think that it's as important to think about what they're inheriting as well as just like the idea of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have another generation so they can inherit stuff from me and my name and my face. And I'm like, yeah, cool, but also let's think about what house they're gonna inherit and what earth they're gonna inherit.
Yes.
What is what you're passing on? What is that standing on? Like, how sound is that? We're actually getting rained on right now.
We might be. How waterproof is
this
equipment?
Well, I guess we're about to find out. Yeah, we might have to move. Okay,
we'll pause that.
Okay, so in a true feat of much legendary community that I thought had died, me and Sara have just walked into this place called Hanbury House, which is a co-working space that we've never been to before.
That looks really cool.
And we just walked up to the man and we were like, hi, this is our predicament, we need to finish this podcast. And he showed us to this store cupboard that we're now sitting in, surrounded by Christmas decorations and paper cups. And we're going to finish the podcast recording here. So
yes.
If it sounds better than it did in the park, that's why.
Yeah, I'll try not to knock over these.
Yeah, but I think it's quite poignant that we were interrupted by weather.
Yeah.
I think that like Father Nature was making himself heard.
Yeah, we could not. The environment did not fade into the background. It came, like in the book, it came to the forefront.
Main character energy from British weather today. Love it. So to get back on track, we're going to do a 5-minute spoiler section where we just get to blurt our feelings about some of the twists that happen in the book. You can skip forward about 5 minutes, but I'll put the specific timestamps in the description if you want to be precise about it. But now we're going to let out all our feelings about that. Okay, Sarah, when did you work out that they were 3 characters instead of 1? They're 1 character instead of 3.
But they're all the same character.
Yes. So if you don't know, and you just want to listen to the spoilers because you're that kind of like sadist kind of reader, all of the 3 characters we explained are actually one person who has so many traumatic experiences they keep having to change their name and change their life every decade.
Yep, they have had 3, like, this is like 3 eras of their life.
Yes.
This is the same person at different stages of their life.
And the earlier 2 stages when she's younger are told in past tense, and then the only clue is, I guess, that I didn't pick up on is that the oldest person's perspective is told in present tense.
Yeah, present second person.
Kind of like a computer game. Not that I know that much about computer games.
You do this, you do that.
And now you see that he's on the floor. You go up to see if he's okay. Like, it's all very video gamey, even though I don't know that much about video games.
From what you understand of video
From what I understand about them, they're told in present tense, and when there's little paragraphs that come up and they're like,
they put you right in that person's perspective.
Yes.
You're the you.
So that was the only clue, but I didn't pick up on it, and I didn't know until it was very explicit.
So I did something that I recommend you do not do. Although maybe you have done it if you were listening to the spoiler section, and maybe this advice is not necessary if you are listening to spoilers. But anyway, I unfortunately spoiled this really big revelation for myself because I became very curious about the language and Jemisin is using throughout the book, and I started Googling the meanings of words because cyanite is, I think it's like a form of stone or like
I'm sure that there's probably like a essay somewhere that somebody's written about the use of names and naming conventions in the fifth season.
First thing,
because it feels like all of the names probably have a meaning. Yeah, like
there's
that,
everyone's like, cyanite, alabaster. They're like things to do with material, like, natural materials. And so I was like, oh, what is cyanite? What does cyanite look like? Googled cyanite, like one of the first things that count, cyanite. Also, Demaya and Essen in the 5th season. I was like, what? What? And
damn it.
It was like 100 pages.
So you got spoiled really early.
I spoiled myself before. And when I reread it, I was like, would I have figured this out? And I don't think I would.
I wish I'd have known, because I think that if I reread it, which I might,
yeah,
I did enjoy it, so I might reread it. You never know. I think I'd enjoy it more knowing that, even though I know it's a spoiler.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing because I think like she does a good job, obviously, since I don't think I could have. You didn't work it out until
I didn't work it out
until she said it explicitly. I didn't work it out until I did Googling. Do not Google while you're reading books in general. I don't think you should. Wait till afterwards.
You're just a naturally curious person, which is something I like about you.
Yeah.
But it's obviously a bit of a problem when it comes
I had to know what cyanide meant. And you know what? I am not sure what it means now because I was so distracted by the massive... But it's amazing. Like, I thought that was an amazing thing. It made sense. Like, they were so distinct, and yet it made sense. The point of the book, which you figured out, is probably like three-quarters of the way through, and one by one you realize that they're the same and that she's changed her name.
I think it was also really clever looking back, because the idea of the civilization is that, like, your world keeps collapsing and you have to rebuild it, and within her life stuff kept wiping her life out and she'd have to rebuild it. She had several partners, she had some children that died, and she gets new children, they die. It is like a kind of, she is constantly in the fifth season of her life.
Her life is a microcosm.
Yes, that's a much cleverer way of putting it.
And that names are so important, not just for her and attach the different identities, whether she's Essen, the sort of passing person in a small village, Cyanite, who has a recent graduate of like a training academy for Origins on a journey to do like a big job with her mentor, or like Demaya, a teenage girl who is just about to go into a training. I'm like, that should have tipped me off.
They were in the same training camp, but there are quite a lot of Origins about, so you can be forgiven for that
like you're
as
like,
well.
oh, that's just what happens to Origins. They have to go to a training academy.
The other things that I liked that I couldn't talk about in the beginning of the podcast, I liked the presence of trans characters that wasn't explicitly like spelled out, but was a normal part of the world, and that one of the characters resurfaces in a different part of her life who is trans, and
she has a different name. She has two. We meet her with a couple of names too.
Yes,
and so we realize that, and we realize that her story has been in parallel with the main, like, Cyanite, Demaya, Essen, and in fact been affecting certain key points in our main character's life.
She's been like a hidden influence.
I don't really know what her main name is. I guess, like, maybe, I mean, actually, should it be her most recent name?
It should be her most recent name, not Tonks, but What is it?
Tonki. So yeah, Tonki. But like also with Demaya Essen Cyanite, would you say that she should be Essen because that is the name that she's been going by most recently?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Because I think that she's chosen Essun as like the name that reflects her now.
Yes.
And all of her things that have happened to her that aren't to do with the trans experience, but again, who like is also just like this interesting thing of like who hasn't felt like several different people in their lives, depending on, and like I look back and I'm like, oh, who was that Leena? Because we don't know her. What was she doing? I can't answer for her mistakes.
No.
And people ask me why I've done some stuff in the past, and I'm like, I don't know. That's not me. So I don't know. I can't tell you why that person did that. So it's interesting where it's like it's more normalized in that world to have new names.
Yeah, and they signify things. And actually, I think they say because they tend to have three names. They have like their first name, which does seem to be linked. I don't know. It seems to fit with the other two names. Like the second name is their use. Mm-hmm. Their use. Like what is their function? It could be origin. It could be strongback, which means they're strong. It could mean innovator, which means they're kind of sciencey.
Yeah.
Or leadership, which means that they're born to lead. And then the third name is the name of the community that they come of age in, that they're considered to have contributed to. So they get to sort of choose. They're like, you have been of value.
Yeah, rather than a bloodline,
yes.
you're inheriting, like you get some kind of autonomy in your own naming.
Yeah, and so like when someone says their names, it kind of tells people about them, almost everything that they might need to know.
What if you're like my name, I'm like, well, all it tells you is that I might have been descended from some people from Normandy, maybe.
Oh my god, mine as well.
Oh my god, twinsies.
Veal is like from an old village in Normandy,
Oh
apparently.
really?
Yeah.
Oh my god,
maybe
we're related.
It's old.
Who can say?
It's an old Norman name.
It's old. Yeah, and so I think that's interesting. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was the polyamory in the third part.
That's like the most joyful part of it.
There's a lovely part near the end of the book, so you should read it if you haven't. But like I loved when they found this like slight pocket of safety on an island. So one of the concepts is that the stillness is the continent where everything's safe. They're not really sure if other continents exist because people have basically just stopped using the ocean as a concept. They're just like, we're not going near that.
No.
But there are some islands where small communities of people live and are safe. So in the middle of her life, she goes to one of these islands with Alabaster, Hottie, and they find a third person that they're both in love with, and they like introduce him in, and then they have a baby, and the baby has two fathers and one mother, and it's lovely, and it's the condition of sci-fi and the nature of the novel that it had to end, and like it was probably going to be tragic, and it was tragic, but I'm so glad we got to experience it because that's one of my favorite part of the book.
I love that part. It suddenly got joyful because so much of it is grave and serious and painful and dark. Like, you know, when we were like overviewing like our thoughts on this, we were sort of like, it's hard to visualize this. It's more like you feel this book. You feel textures. You said it was a textured book. Stone, the atmosphere, their feelings, their emotions. Like it was, I didn't see things. Like I mean, and when they described colors, they were like they seemed like gray or brown or dusty. What I think is that because of the way the world is in this book, it is quite hard to see things. Yes. They don't have a lot of visibility.
And I was struggling as a reader to picture it, but then when you said that, I was like, oh, that's probably why. Like, it's not that it's badly written or anything. I was just like, as somebody who's not a sci-fi reader, I was like, maybe it's me that I can't create these worlds in my head. Like, I want to know what they're wearing because it's probably not what we're wearing. But you're right that it's like, it's actually fundamentally more of a tactile novel than it is like a visual one.
Yes. Yeah. So it is hard to see. But I think that's the point, because I think they find I don't think they're that visually led in the book either. Yeah. That's not at the forefront. It feels like everything is sort of a bit foggy and covered in dust.
Definitely. The last spoilery thing I wanted to say was what I thought was interesting is how the book ends, which is with Alabaster saying, "Have you heard of a thing called a moon?" And the whole way through the book, they've seeded this idea that people don't look up at the sky very much because they're so focused on the ground, and they've heard about like ancient civilizations caring about the alignment of stars and the way that stars are presented, so like basically alluding to like astronomy, but they're like, we don't care about astronomy anymore because they don't understand how the weather works. They've lost that knowledge
on the tectonics,
and they're one of the things that they're missing from the sky is a moon. So I'm excited, if I do read the other books, to hear about them finding the moon or like working out what a moon was. I thought that was really clever.
It's very compelling, like, to find out what happens next in it.
Yeah.
Like,
and that we're a civilization that looks up at the sky so much and talks about God.
we're more interested in the sky than we are. Like, we know more about space than we do about the sea.
We're obsessed with it. I mean, Jeff Bezos, classic example, obsessed with space, doesn't care about the Earth.
Did he really go to space and come back? I was so hopeful.
Just stay him. Just leave him there. So I think that was a really clever. Like, that makes me think a lot about how we're obsessed with God and the sky and that kind of thing. And there's actually an absence of religion in the book, I'd say. Is there any religion in the book?
Yeah, they talk about like ancient stone lore. Yeah, it seems like there are gods in this world, but they actually are real. Like, it's not like whether you believe in them or not. Like,
no, they just exist.
I think, there's something to do with. I think they're called stone eaters.
Yeah. 2 questions to end on that might be related together. That's why I'm asking them together.
Okay.
Do you have like one big takeaway from this book that you're going to come away and be like, I feel differently about the climate, or I feel differently about the way I see the world? And would you recommend this book to other people? And if so, who? Like, do those, those things might link? So,
this book made me... I think this book made me more aware of, like, power, like, and oppression, and the way that it interacts with the environment. Mm-hmm. The world was very strange to me, and actually that's why I found, like, it was good to reread it twice. So the first time I was like, what is going on? That's why I Googled. I shouldn't have Googled.
I understand why you did it.
But I gave into the Googling because I was so like trying to make sense of the world. And N.K. Jemisin doesn't really like hold your hand like into the world. She just throws you in it. But her characters are thrown into their environments as well. And you're just like along for the ride. And you will understand a lot more about it by the end. Trust that.
Yeah.
The things you're wondering about, the meaning of them actually unravels like the way the society works in the book. So just stay with it.
Yeah.
There's like a part where they talk about language, and like I think Alabaster kind of falls silent, and she's like, oh, he doesn't have the language to say something. Maybe one day we will have a language to describe what
it's not that he's scared to say it, it's that he can't because he doesn't have the words.
There aren't the words to go with it. But actually, like, the book is made up of words that kind of put this whole world, this whole strange to us future world together. So this book made me much more aware of power. Reading it a second time, I was able to like focus a bit more on like the human dynamics of it, which were really interesting because I think they just subvert expectations. I like how she explores gender, sexuality, relationships, trauma. All that's like the softness like in the book underneath all like the hard, rocky, rusty stuff. I would recommend people read this.
I'd recommend it. I think I'm not somebody who like loves sci-fi and fantasy, but in this circumstance I really enjoyed the book. And I think that if you are somebody who like knows that they're not going to permanently delve into the world of sci-fi, I'm like, but read some sci-fi. And if you're going to read some sci-fi or some cli-fi, read this.
I
think it's really real and psychologically.
And there's fun polyamorous pirate stuff if you keep going.
Sold to the woman in the leopard print dress, which is both of us today. I agree. I think it's quite unique and
very unique.
It reminded me that I don't think sci-fi is like my genre, but I am also like glad to have read this because it discusses that, and I think she's just a good writer. So what's not to like about good writing?
It's very grounded.
It is
the
very
broken
so
Earth
grounded.
Is so grounded.
Which is also very fitting because it's literally set on ground that moves all the time. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Sara.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Or as always. Now let's go and chat for another 4 hours. Bye.
Bye-bye.